Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 313, cover dated June 1994. So the cover title here, Transmode Terror, and the cover featuring Gambit and Storm going up against a entity of the Phalanx, the transformed NSC officer from the previous issue. The cover by Joe Madureira and inked by Dan Green. Joe Madureira finishing off a 2-issue guest penciling stint. But as I said in the video on 312, Bob Harris was so taken by the fan response to Madureira's couple of fill-in issues that he decided to offer the regular penciling gig to the young artist who was only 19 at the time, and then informed John Romita Jr. that he was off the X-Men for the second time. So let's open this one up to the splash page, and we begin in medias res in the middle of things. So at the end of the previous issue, the X-Men have been blown off the pier into the Hudson River. We've got this gigantic hand grasping after Gambit as he's in the water, and of course that gives us our cover title here, our splash page title, Hands Across the Water. So the creative team is Scott Lobdell writer, Joe Madureira penciler, Dan Green inker, Chris Eliopoulos letterer, Steve Buccellato and Kevin Summers colors, Bobbitt Harris editor. That'll tell you what was going on in the social scene at the time. Little reference there to John Wayne Bobbitt. You can look up what happened to him, something very painful, via Google. I won't go into the gory details. And let's continue and see what happens. Will Gambit get away from that Phalanx that is reaching after him? Well, it pushes him all the way down into the Hudson River. And of course, he's losing oxygen there. And look at the designs by Joe Madureira here. Look at this toothy Phalanx undersea monster. And Gambit, of course, he's got a few cards on him and he charges them up kinetically, and he's about ready to direct them at the Phalanx sea monster straight into its open maw. And of course, whoosh. And Gambit says that striking it internally is a crawdad of another flavor, whatever about hitting it externally. So pretty cool opening, action-packed and focused on Gambit with his big red gloves here that are Joe Madureira's addition to Gambit's, what would we say, costume design in his civvies, but with those red gloves. From when he was riding his motorbike, we can explain it that way. And so let's continue and see Gambit here. He's making his way up to the surface, but he happens to see Yukio. She was blasted over the edge into the river too, and she seems to be unconscious, in danger of drowning. And even though Yukio's got it in for him because she knows about his mysterious past, he decides that the whole hero gig means that he's got to save her. So just look at these classic Joe Madureira proportions on this page. The really long, thin legs of Gambit here, and then Yukio too. Really, really long legs. Very distinctive of Madureira's style, but something that he gets and amplifies from Art Adams. So Gambit makes it to the surface and he pulls Yukio out onto the pier, and he notices that there's the thickest fog that he ever saw roll in while they were swimming with the fishes, and that means that Storm's alive out there still fighting. So he's about to give Yukio mouth to mouth when she comes to. Says, "Save your breath, Cajun." Stops his mouth. Says she didn't become a Ronin by depending on a loser like you to save her life. "In case it don't come up later on, Cher," he says, "you're welcome," as he stalks off to help Storm against the Phalanx. And I really like the rendering there of that fog down on the docks. Nice stuff by Madureira and Dan Green. And then we're back at the X-Mansion, and this is continuing on from something that happened in Uncanny X-Men 311, where there was a power surge and then shut down, but Bobby Drake, Iceman, was caught in it while protecting the White Queen in MedLab, and it seems that he is comatose and his body is going crazy with his mutant powers here. and Jubilee's really worried about him because the two of them had a kind of like joshing, bantering relationship, and you know, she is feeling worried about him and whether he's going to survive what's happened. So Beast here says that he's just worried that this means we'll have 6 more weeks of winter. What's going on with Iceman? But seriously, folks, until the popsicle here thaws himself out, and then Jubilee's just had enough. So she pops him in the shoulder, or not in the shoulder, but in the clavicle here. And not clavicle, in the, I'm just drawing a blank here. Let's say the upper chest, right? Pops him in the upper chest and tells him to shut up. And she says here, he's not a popsicle, he's a person. And like, why is she so emotional? A person like Wolverine or Illyana and the dumb old White Queen and everyone else who gets hurt or killed or mangled for no good reason, she'd be trying to help him instead of making lame jokes. So she's overwrought by some of the losses that the X-Men have experienced in recent weeks in the various storylines. And anyway, she recognizes she overreacted. Beast apologizes, but then she has a chat with Banshee outside of MedLab, where she says, it's just the only reason I even started hanging with the X-Men in the first place, way back in Uncanny X-Men 244, Bob Harris gets that one right, was cause I thought it'd be a trip, but it isn't, not always. Not without Wolvie. I guess what I'm saying, Sean, is mutant powers or not, I don't know if I'm ready for this gig, because Wolverine's left as of Wolverine issue number 75, and he won't be back on the X-Men team for a good few years to come in publishing history. So she heads off and says she doesn't know about anything anymore, and this gives Banshee something to chew on and think about. So he says, I hear you, child. What with Charles about to devote more of his time to the legacy virus over on Morale, and the rest of the X-Men knee-deep in one crisis after another, maybe 'tis time someone started worrying about the rest of the children involved in this gig. So this is all foreshadowing for Generation X, when he, and as it turns out, the White Queen, will head up a new academy for younger mutants to train them and make sure that they can thrive and survive in a world that still hates and fears them. So here we've got Bishop and Bishop behind Professor X, guarding him as he goes into Sabretooth's cell. And Sabretooth says here, look, if he'd gotten out free, every ounce of blood that he'd spill, every drop he'd taste, you'd have had to blamed yourself for not killing me when you had the chance. But Professor X is having none of it. So he says here, I'm growing weary of your constant attempts to bait me, Victor. Let me make my position clear again. You will not kill again. We have stopped you, in case you failed to notice. I have every intention of curing you of your madness, your addiction to the glow only a scion can provide. And if you can't chuck what then? Look at that for a toothy mouth there. And that classic Madureira semicircle eye under the straight eyebrow. Very particular style of his. And so they walk off. Great top-down angle as well. And something I said in the previous video is Madureira is good at keeping the angles and perspective in the panel layouts interesting, and keeps the camera moving around, which makes for variety for the reader. And then we go back to the docks, back to the Hudson River docks, and great anchor image here of Storm. And again, just that classic Madureira figure, those long legs and the slim, lithe, slender body as well, and that twisted torso too. Very typical of Madureira in this period. And then look at the big boots as well, again, and hands, all distinctive of his style at the beginning of his work on the book, before he would go for a full kind of manga influence. So Storm is using her powers against this Phalanx entity, and it is not working 100%. And from behind her, the NSC officer blasts at her, but she dodges it. And what she discovers here is that the blast, when it connects with this guy, has a feedback, biofeedback, a critical biofeedback, which overloads this entity. And so Storm is putting it together. Blasting the other member of the Phalanx had an equally devastating effect on the female as well. So then she goes, is this then your original form, that of a human woman who willfully infected herself with a transmode virus? To what end, to what purpose? Just the one reason, really. And then we got this image of this gun barrel forming as she grabs Storm's arm to destroy you and your kind. So the Phalanx are all about mutant genocide, but Gambit arrives and breaks her neck cracked from behind, and he says, not bad, would have thought it'd take more than that to take it out. Apparently she was still reeling from the biofeedback, says Storm. And there, look at the state of that transmode entity. So Gambit says to Storm, let's keep this in perspective. She stopped being a she the moment she became part of the Phalanx. It's an it, wires, programming, garbage in, garbage out, nothing more than a sentinel with a conscience. It's the enemy share, and thinking anything else is a good way to get ourselves killed. Do you believe that, Remy? She asks, that our claim to life is any more valid than their own? So for Storm, it's a moral dilemma. For Gambit, no. And they walk off into the fog that Storm has created. And then we shift elsewhere. So we don't know exactly where this is, but here we have an old character, old villain from the very beginning of Chris Claremont's run, way back in issue 96. It's Stephen Lang. And it turns out he was the anonymous patient removed from a hospital by the Friends of Humanity in issue 291 of Uncanny X-Men. So Scott Lobdell seeding this a good couple of years in advance, though I have read that it is likely, or the way that Lobdell plotted X-Men at the time is he would add things that he didn't 100% know what he was going to do with it in the future, but he wanted to seed in possibilities for himself up ahead to draw on. So he may not have originally intended the patient to be Stephen Lang, but it turns out he decides that it's Stephen Lang, and here he is in the middle of whatever it is that the Phalanx is all about. And we get in the narrative captions here a little potted history about Lang and how he was a proud man at the pinnacle of his career, yet what happened afterwards, the fall from grace as it were, his near fatal accident aboard an orbiting SHIELD platform. That's issue 98 of Uncanny X-Men. His exposure to radiation, his long wait for death and release are memories that seem to belong to someone else entirely. Even his most recent past, his liberation from the convalescent home, issue 291, his downloading to the core of the Phalanx's collective intellect, there is nothing to which he can relate. The moment is all that matters. And this moment finds his attention divided between the fate of the Phalanx's current target designates and the state of the latest handful of recruits to their cause. So he asked for a status report, Mr. Ramsey. So who does this turn out to be? Except for apparently Douglas Ramsey, who is now part of the Phalanx collective entity. And so he gives these status reports on these batches that have been absorbed into the Phalanx, 50% success ratio. So one of them, Profile Camden M, this guy here, fully integrated Phalanx core, but Profile H Schwant, biograph rejected. This guy here, transmode sequence aborted. So recommend parameters include insufficient data at current time to recommend parameter alterations. So great imagery here and design work by Joe Madureira regarding these Phalanx entities, and wherever it is, that is the matrix of the Phalanx as well. So Lang here is impressed. It's been months now since we assimilated your dead cells into our womb. Months. Still, you resist, Ramsey. Do you not understand? You are not alive, never were. Nothing more than a program. based on entities designated Ramsey Douglas and his techno-organic symbiote Warlock. Now Tella's recommendations for higher biographical field, but Douglock resists and says sufficient data at current time, insufficient data at current time to make any recommendations. So Lang is disgusted, has enough, and bats the representation of Doug's face away, saying there is no place for individual thought amongst us. If you cannot exist within the Phalanx, you cannot exist at all. So kind of comparable or analogous to the Borg in Star Trek mythos. And then he calls up, well, who is it? Last seen in issue 306, Cameron Hodge. Cameron Hodge says, current tracker units report engagement on subject designate Yukio, awaiting confrontation order. So Lang goes back to the business at hand. So much to consider, so many routes to monitor. Self-diagnostics program delayed. Reschedule for first available RAM space. Noted and logged, Lang. So there we go. And look, Hodge is just this floating head as well, because that's all that survived Extinction Agenda. And then we go back to the pier on the Hudson, and we have this monstrous figure here, and the NSC officer reconstituted herself, and they're about to take out Yukio, who's still on the dock and is here saying that she can be reasonable, that if you need dirt on the X-Men, just ask. So it seems as if she's about to betray the X-Men, but really it's a diversion, as Storm and Gambit work together on a plan to take out these two Phalanx entities. So Gambit is charging up a massive object. He says here, the bigger the object, the longer it takes to charge, and it don't get much bigger than this share. So we're going to see what that object is exactly. It's these massive iron chain links used to anchor the aircraft carrier to the dock. So Storm uses her power to break it off, and Gambit has charged it up, and down it falls on the NSC Phalanx entity, and she just gives out one last message: communication core central logging off. She knows it's over for her. So let's take a look and see how Joe Madureira draws it. So there you go. Down goes the kinetically charged massive chain link, and takes out the Phalanx entities before they can act. And Yukio dives off the dock into the Hudson, and here's Storm blowing the smithereens of the Phalanx entities out into the ocean. And she thinks to herself about them that these are, if we believe their claim, something far more than sentinels and something far less than human. Although we have a right, and with our powers the responsibility to defend ourselves and others, how long will it be until we are forced to accept that this life form might lay claim to their own place in this world? So this is the difference between taking out sentinels that are just robots driven by computer programs and that aren't actually conscious or sentient, and this new threat, this kind of upgraded sentinel type threat. So Storm concludes, she says, those people sacrificed their lives to become the Phalanx. Will it cost us our souls to ultimately defeat them? And this is all set up for the upcoming summer crossover, Phalanx crossover. There's a little tribute here to Jack Kirby, who died in early 1994, a heart attack. So sadly missed by all these luminaries of Marvel here. And then we pick up with Gambit pulling himself up onto the dock, and he gets a kick in the jaw from Yukio. This is really nicely drawn by Madureira, and she says, I don't know what you're up to, but if Aurora gets hurt, your Cajun butt is mine. It's always been Cher, he says in reply. This is a great little panel here with the various characters in silhouette. Really nicely done and reads very well. Then Yukio says that reporting back to the X-Men can wait because she's got to be back in Tokyo by noon, and they've so much to catch up on. So they're going to go maybe out night clubbing, yes. And she'll show up next in Wolverine 82 back in Japan. Yeah. Nice artwork on this page. And then we're back in the mansion where Bishop has some doubts about what his encounter with Sabretooth revealed about how sharp he is. But I think he did quite well in issue 311. He was pretty quick off the mark, and really was the key factor in preventing Sabretooth from escaping out the Morlock tunnels. But Jubilee interrupts the conversation between Professor X and Bishop, where Bishop is doubting his abilities, to call them to MedLab, and what awaits them there is seemingly Iceman conscious again. But what's he saying here? Why so surprised, X-Men? Surely you didn't think you'd trap me here forever. And even without a mind scan, Professor X recognizes her. Not at all, he says. We were simply attending to your needs while you were recuperating from your injuries. As it is, let me be the first to welcome you back to the land of the living. Who is it? Emma Frost. So Emma has made her way into Iceman's body, and just look at what she's done, how vicious and dangerous he looks. So next, White Queen's Night. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 313. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.